Hey guys, what is up? My name is Dabe and welcome to this video. So this one is going to be a little bit different than the stuff I normally post, kind of just an extra little video thrown in there. I saw that the blog for the Theater of Blood, which is Raids 2, came out a little while ago, just a couple of hours ago actually, and I've been thrilled to make a video talking about it. I just spent a couple hours on my stream talking to my viewers about it and whatnot. And I feel like I have some pretty interesting views on some of these things, and I feel like, a lot of other people do as well. So I like to make a video talking about it, giving my opinions and comparing things to items that already exist in game, if I think things are overpowered, if I think things belong in the game or whatnot. In no way am I trying to convince anyone to vote based on my opinions. I want to get that clear right now. Vote for whatever you feel like you would like to vote for. These are just my opinions, and I'm curious what your guys' opinions are in the comments. So feel free to leave comments as you feel necessary, but let's go ahead and get started. So what is the Theater of Blood? The Theater of Blood is the sequel to Raids. Now, it is not the sequel in the sense of they are correlated in a quest fashion or anything, but it is going to be Raids 2. Supposedly, the new, most difficult PvM challenge in the game, and it probably will be for a while until Lukes figures it out and ends up soloing it within a week. So a couple of the bosses have already been briefly mentioned, but the one that they're highlighting on this devlog is Zarpus, which is basically, from what it seems like, just a extremely strong bat-like creature. So, seems interesting, not a whole lot of information given, but it's trapped inside the theater, and from what they've also mentioned in the dev blog, the Theater of Blood is going to be a linear raid. Now, why is that so special? Well, because a linear raid means that it's going to be the same bosses from start to finish every time. You have to go and do them the same way every time. Like, it's going to be the same thing every time you go in, similar to how it is when you go to God Wars, for example. You go in, you kill Bandos, you leave. So, this is going to be similar in that sense, whereas with the original raids, with Raids 1, it was people would go in and scout, find a particular boss pattern they liked, and the only thing that would technically be the same every time would be Ulm. It's also been stated that the maximum group size for the Theater of Blood is actually 5, which I find very interesting, because that means that there aren't going to be able to be masses for this, and it's been scaled for sizes of 3 to 5 players. This could be relevant. Like I said, in all likelihood, people will be able to solo it in the future, but there has also been some talk on the dev streams about how there's a potential that certain mechanics will literally require 2 players to be in the raid at any given time, or 3 players to be in the raid at any given time, which I think is kind of nice. I mean, forced interaction isn't exactly the best thing in the world. I mean, I'm an Iron Man, so, by the way, so it kind of seems weird that I'd be pushing for that, but I like the idea of group bossing, and I hope to see it return with Raids 2. So a few very important things have been mentioned about Raids 2, one of them being that the bosses won't be able to drop very many supplies, or they won't be dropping very many supplies, and on top of that, the items that you bring in are extremely relevant. You aren't going to be able to make potions inside of Raids 2, which I think is pretty interesting. I'm kind of happy about that because it means inventory management is fairly relevant. So with that being said, the death mechanics in Raids 2 are fairly unique compared to other things in Old School. They actually feature the wiping mechanic. So if somebody dies, you can't just run back in and continue helping your team. What actually happens is, if you die, you can't go back and help until your team either completes the boss without you, or they all die and you all go back in. So I think that's kind of interesting, because Old School hasn't really had anything like that before, at least not that I can recall. And on top of that, deaths are not safe. Your items won't be instantly lost. They'll be reclaimed, and you have to pay a certain fee to get them all back, similar to Zulrah and Dragon Slayer 2 and everything like that. However, hardcore Iron Men will lose their status if they die. Now, why do I sound excited about that? I'm not a hardcore. I've never been a hardcore. I have an extreme level of respect for people who play in that manner. However, I think that it was really dumb that Raids 1 was a safe death, and that if you died as a hardcore in Raids 1, you wouldn't lose your status. I think that's kind of stupid, because a lot of the items from Raids 1 are best in slot. The Prayers, Twisted Bow, Ancestral, all of that can be obtained without ever putting your account in any risk whatsoever. So I think it's really interesting that with Raids 2, you actually have to present your account with some level of risk as a hardcore if you want to obtain the new items that will be potentially released with it. Moving on to the rest of the poll. Sorry, a bit of an introduction, but all of that seems like it's fairly relevant information. I'm basically just paraphrasing the dev blog and giving you guys my opinions on it, like I said earlier. So the first big thing that they bring up with this is actually a new quest. So this new quest will offer a teleport to the Theater of Blood. It is called A Taste of Hope, And if you don't complete this quest, you will have to, I believe, take a boat that is located on Port Phasmatis to get there, and I think they said that's also going to have a fee. Or you can walk, but walking through that area takes forever, we all know that, so I'm guessing this quest is going to be fairly mandatory if you want to camp Raids 2. It is also mentioned that the new quest will give you a new weapon for killing vampires. This could end up being relevant for Raids 2. I doubt it, because it's a quest, but it could end up being relevant. You never know. So it probably is going to be fairly forced for players to complete this quest. So as I mentioned before, inventory management is going to be fairly relevant in Theater of Blood, at least according to what we've seen so far. And if that's the case, that's probably why these things are all being asked about. But these are all a list of potions that are going to be potentially added to the game if they pass the polls. The first one is the Bastion potion. It's basically the combination of a range potion and a super defense potion. I don't think that's all that relevant. I can't see that being really game breaking anywhere, just a minor convenience factor. The next one is a Battle Mage potion, which is just a combination of a magic potion and a super defense potion. Once again, don't see that being all that relevant because who uses magic potions really anywhere? I can't really think of very many people that actually use them. This one's a little more interesting. It's called the Totality Potion. This one is kind of like an Overload, but not necessarily the same. It's basically a combination of a Super Combat, a Range Potion, and a Magic Potion. I think this one is interesting. Once again, I don't think it's really game-breaking because it isn't like an Overload in the fact that it will keep boosting your stats. It's just an inventory saver. I'll probably be voting yes on most of these potions because I don't think that they're really game-breaking for that reason. It's just inventory saving, which in a way can be considered overpowered, but I don't really think it's crazy. Now these next two are ones I'm not necessarily sure about yet. These ones are a bit more interesting with their use, and I can see some of them being broken. So the first one is a Vigor Potion. This one is basically a prayer potion as well as a weak stamina combined. So I don't know what their definition of weak stamina potion effect is. It says it lasts for 1 minute instead of 2. I don't know if it holds your runoff in the same way that a stamina does, or if it will have a lesser effect in addition to not lasting as long. But a combination of a prayer potion and a stamina potion might not seem all that crazy. But then when you think about a boss like Commander Ziliana, where for soloing, you are constantly running around the room, that could be pretty crazy for people who don't prayer flick. So that one, I'm not sure what I'm going to vote on yet. It might be a little bit overpowered though, so I'm not really sure. So this next one, I'm having trouble coming to terms with thinking that it belongs in the game. I probably will be pretty against it unless someone convinces me otherwise, but this one is a super prayer potion. So both of this and the Vigor Potion restore the same amount of prayer points as a normal prayer potion would, but instead of the stamina effect like the Vigor Potion had, this one gives you a prayer renewal effect for an additional 6 prayer points over 30 seconds. Now that doesn't seem that crazy, but at my prayer level on this account, I'm 92. Each prayer potion gives me 31 or 30 or 31 prayer points, something in that vicinity. So that would basically mean that an entire super prayer potion would give me an additional dose of prayer, or close to an additional dose of prayer per potion. I think that that's a little bit strong. I don't know if I want this in the game, but as of right now, I'm pretty against it because I'm just against the concept of prayer renewal in general outside of Raids 1. Here's where we get into the more interesting stuff for a lot of people. So the next thing on the poll is the Infernal Defender. So this one is just an upgraded Dragon Defender. I think that this is pretty interesting. It's actually not too crazy. You have to combine it with a Dragon Defender, so you still would have to get a Dragon Defender on your own. The concept of the Infernal Defender, like the thing you attach to the Dragon Defender, which is called the Infernal Hilt, will be tradable. So that's, in its own right, a bit interesting. The stats on this, I probably have them on the screen right now, are not that much better than a Dragon Defender. The main thing, other than the slight increase to accuracy, is the +2 strength bonus over the existing Dragon Defender. +2 strength bonus is, I think, half of a max hit. So I don't think this is crazy, it's just slight power creep. I'm perfectly fine with it. Probably will be voting yes for this one. This one is pretty interesting, but I don't think this will ever be used. This one is called the Judgment Prayer Scroll. So what this is a new overhead prayer requiring 85 prayer to use. It will be tradable, similar to the Rigor and Augury Scrolls, which I think is pretty nice. What this does is it boosts your melee attack by 10%, but lowers your defense by 50% while active. 1/6 of any damage dealt is removed from prayer. So I think it's kind of nice because since this is an overhead prayer, it will be able to be stacked with things like piety. So you'll get an additional 10% accuracy when you're using it with piety. However, since it's an overhead prayer, you can't use things like protect from melee, protect from magic, or protect from range. I can't really see this being used anywhere other than when you're specking with a Dragon Warhammer just for accuracy purposes, for maybe specking Kerp, potentially, but you wouldn't have overheads on, so Kerp would really mess you up in that time. I really can't think of any place that this is particularly useful, mainly because of the prayer drain. So the 1/6 prayer drain would mean that, you know, if you were to be specking with a Dragon Warhammer, for example, you want that extra accuracy, fantastic. You can have it at the risk of already losing defense and no overhead. But if you hit like a 60 with your spec, that's 10 prayer points gone right there. That's a pretty big sacrifice. So if the super prayer potions don't pass, I really don't see something like this being used very much. I can't see it being very practical unless it's tweaked a little bit. I mean, that being said, I'm sure it'll be good in some niche situations. It's not overpowered, it's not game breaking. Probably voting yes. So the next thing on the poll is the Sanguinesti, hope I'm saying that right, staff. Now this one actually has the same exact magic accuracy and supposedly the same DPS as a Trident of the Swamp. However, its effect is quite different. The effect of this staff is that it has a 1 in 8 chance to heal you for 50% of the damage dealt when attacking an NPC. Now, that being said, it takes 4 blood runes per cast, which leads me to believe that the 50% heal is a spell that is built in with the staff, similar to a Trident of the Swamp, although that's not explicitly stated, which is a little bit strange. I'm assuming that if it is a built-in spell, which it probably is, then you will not gain the benefit of a 1 in 8 chance to heal for 50% damage when using other spells. Because adding 4 blood runes onto the cast of any other spell would be pretty ridiculous, and if that is the case, I really don't see this staff being used anywhere. However, if it is a built-in spell, you can bring as many blood runes with you as you want anywhere you go, meaning that the staff would basically have infinite charges depending on how many blood runes you bring. Now, if it is the same DPS as a Trident of the Swamp, I don't think that that's that broken. Magic is honestly not utilized at very many places unless you're forced to use magic, like at Zolra, the Olm Hands, for example. There's places where you are actually kind of forced to use magic. Another one would be Dagonoth Rex. However, there are some places where magic is seeing some more utility, like Bandos. The solo or duo mage method for Bandos is something that's not exactly accepted as the meta, but has been becoming a bit more popular lately, and I have seen a lot of people using it, as I'm sure you guys have probably seen a few people using it as well. So I can see this definitely taking the place of the Trident at specifically Bandos and Rex, because the Venom effect of the Toxic Trident doesn't apply at most bosses, so the extra utility of the Venom is fairly irrelevant. You just have it for the extra accuracy and extra damage of having a Toxic Trident, whereas at Rex, a lot of people still use blood spells to heal, myself included, so not always, but you know, sometimes if you need health, it's beneficial to have. So if the Sanguinesti staff restores that health on a 1 in 8 chance, you probably would not have to bring blood spells with you to Dagonoth Kings, meaning you could take Alks with you, or Potshare if you're duoing, but if you have this staff, I'm assuming you're rich enough to not need to duo Dagonoth Kings. So I can see it being slightly game-changing at some areas, but not so game-changing that it's overpowered or broken. Probably a yes for me. Alright, next on the list is the Grazi Rapier. Now, I know a lot of people were freaking out when they saw this on the dev blog and everything, thinking, oh god, Chaotix. But there's no need to freak out. It is not Chaotix. It is the same tier as a Tentacle Whip. Actually, if you take a look at the stats I have on your screen, it's the same exact stats as Tentacle Whip, except the stab and slash are flipped. That's actually it, I'm pretty sure. I think it is actually the exact same stats as an Abyssal Tentacle, with just flipped stab and slash. Now, is this extremely relevant? I'm not entirely sure. Basically, this weapon would be taking the place of the Zamorakian Hasta, unless you're a tank and you want the extra defense bonuses from the Hasta, which is, in my opinion, not super often. So I can see this being used in Raids 1, because it would replace the Tentacle Whip, it doesn't degrade, and it would probably have similar DPS, unless for some reason Ulm is weak to slash and not stab. And it also has the additional utility of, since it is a stab weapon, it would be helpful against Vasa. And not sure how it would perform on Tecton, because I don't know if Tecton is extra strength against stab. I know it's weak to crush, but I don't know how its stab versus slash defenses really compare. So I can see this being fairly nice. It'll also be helpful for dragon tasks. And the fact that it's non-degradable, like I mentioned, is fairly beneficial, but I really don't think this is that crazy at all, actually. I can't think of a single place where this would be overpowered or broken in any sense. So if you guys have one, please feel free to let me know in the comments. I would love to hear it, because I can only think of this being heavily used at like Rune Dragons. Other places I was thinking were like Zami and Sire, but both of those bosses are susceptible to the Arclight, which is more DPS than a Tent Whip. So that would also probably mean it's more DPS than the Rapier. So I don't think this is all that crazy. Once again, probably a yes for me. Alright, so the next thing on the list is the Justicar armor. So this one is most comparable to Torag equipment, with a slight prayer bonus and additional defense bonuses. So I'm going to try to put the stats of full Torags on the screen now. If not, I'll put the individual pieces, or I'll just buy Torags on my main and put the stats of that on there, or something like that. I'll figure something out. However, this does have an additional effect. The additional effect is actually pretty interesting. Basically, it gives you a straight up percentage damage reduction. Now, this percentage is based on your defensive bonuses. So since this is defensive armor, your defensive bonuses are probably going to be fairly high. The example given is that it rolls of your defensive bonus over 3,000. So if, for example, you have 450 defensive bonus against Crush, then you will have a 15% damage reduction against that attack style, in addition to the defensive bonuses you already have. So it's not providing extra defensive bonuses, it's just a straight up damage reduction, which is pretty crazy. Now, since this armor is just helm, chest, and legs, you can still use other things with it. Like, you could use a Dins and get a crazy amount of damage reduction on top of insanely high defensive stats if you were to pile it on with, like, Ring of Suffering, Guardian Boots, and all of the most defensive gear in the game. That's pretty crazy, in theory. However, using a Dins in practice in PvM is pretty crappy for most bossing situations, so I don't really think that that's going to be all that necessary to think about. The thing that I'm thinking about is stacking this with an Elysian Spirit Shield. Now, an Elysian Spirit Shield, I could be wrong on this number, but it has a 70% chance to reduce incoming damage by 25%. So when you see the little sparkly effect on the side of the LE going off, that means that the damage was reduced by 25% for that particular attack. So if you stack that with a potential 15% damage reduction that the Justicar armor would be providing you, if not more, I'm not entirely sure how high defensively you could get. I'm assuming probably in the 450 to 500 range if you're wearing max defenses and everything else and using a Hasta for your weapon and everything. That's pretty crazy. You could get upwards of a continual 15 to 20% damage reduction, and then when the LE procs, an additional 25%. So upwards of 40 to 45% damage reduction in particular scenarios. Now, even though that sounds crazy, is it going to be used very much is the main question you need to think about when considering these pulls. Now, the main thing that always comes to mind for me is Bandos. A lot of people are going to say, well, this is crazy for Slayer tasks and things like that. However, you have to be wearing the full set to get the damage reduction effect. Otherwise, it's basically just Torags with a prayer bonus, or slightly better Torags with a prayer bonus. So that's pretty important. It means you won't be able to use this with Slayer, you won't be able to like use this as Brid armor and get like partial damage reduction. You have to be wearing the entire thing for it to work. So the main thing, like I said before, that you could probably think about this is Bandos and potentially Zami. Now, I say Zami because I don't necessarily know if this method's very effective, but I know a lot of people lately have been talking about wear super tanky armor and pray mage against Zami and just tank his normal hits. I don't know how effective that is, so I'm not trying to say that that's the meta for Zami tanking or anything. I'm pretty sure it's not, but thank you for the lag, Jagex. I'm pretty sure it's not the meta, but this might actually end up making it a bit better in that sense. And if you have a Bandos tank that for some reason can afford this armor, which will likely be fairly expensive, they will be taking next to no damage. Now, here's one thing that I did think of that I don't know how relevant this actually is. As someone who hasn't completed the Inferno, I don't know how relevant this is for this aspect, but I know that some people who are fairly inexperienced at Inferno like myself take in a Bandos chestplate or a Bandos armor switch for the later waves in attempts to tank when they are freezing the Nibblers. Now, it is possible that the Justicar face guard, which is the helmet, will have very comparable stats to a Varix helm since it's just slightly better than Torag's helm, and it actually does have a prayer bonus. So I could actually see that replacing a Varix helmet, and if it does replace the Varix helmet, people might take the Justicar chest and legs in order to tank those later waves when they're first walking out and getting their freezes. Now, obviously, people who have done the Inferno several times don't take these switches. They don't bring Bandos with them. They've always just taken Arma and Ancestral. However, there is a potential that for first-time Inferno goers, this might actually make it a little bit easier in terms of tanking those later waves. Now, like I said, I haven't completed the Inferno myself. I'm pretty sure that most people, even if it's their first time, don't really use the Bandos switch or anything, but I have seen some people doing it, and I think that this could potentially be something to consider. Even if it's not very relevant, it could be a very, very niche use for this armor. However, other than that, and like I said, God Wars tanking, it probably won't be very useful, and I don't see this armor being very expensive. And when I say not being very expensive, I don't see the entire set exceeding maybe 500 mil after the prices settle down a little bit, unless it is extremely useful in raids too. Alright, here's the next one. You guys might have seen something similar to this, and the last video I made about a poll was a long time ago was actually in regards to the Revenant Caves, and it was a very similar concept to this, actually. The next item is Vampirium Vambraces. Say that 10 times fast, I dare ya. So this one is basically new best in slot range gloves. Now I'm sure what you guys are going to expect is exactly what I'm going to say. I'm pretty against this. Range is already incredibly powerful out of all of the combat styles. Whether you think this is true or not, there's DPS calculators that back this up. Out of all the combat styles, it is by far the most powerful right now, even disregarding the Twisted Bow. Using a blowpipe with bronze darts and rigor, I'm fairly certain is better DPS than max strength at Bandos. That's pretty crazy. Now, that being said, I don't think that range necessarily needs a gear upgrade right now, but even if it does, I don't really like the way they're doing this. Now, this one is already better than the one they proposed with Revs, because what this actually requires is a combination of the drop from raids and Ranger Gloves. Ranger Gloves are a reward from an Elite Clue Scroll, so that's already drastically increased the value of it. I'm pretty sure some people have sold them for over 40 mil already, when just the other day they were 2 mil. I'll try and find a screenshot of that posted by someone on Twitter, so yeah, credit to that person will be given. Alright, so remind yourself to put this in the video. Here's a screenshot. It was from Thanks on Twitter. Shout out to him. If you have a Twitter, you should go follow him. But this is something I'm pretty against just because of the ranged strength attached to it. Now, I like the idea that this one at least requires the Ranger Gloves to be attached to it. Ranger Gloves being a fairly rare item already as a reward from Elite Clue Scrolls, it's fairly similar to the Ranger Boots and Pegasian combination from Cerberus. However, one, Elite Clue Scrolls are harder to obtain, and I don't really like that aspect from an Iron Man perspective, but it's not just that I don't like the theory of having to go out and get one myself, it's more so just that the game doesn't need things with more range strength right now, and I really don't like that Jagex is constantly trying to outclass Barrow's Gloves. I think that it's already been done with Mage with the Tormented Bracelet, and I think that Barrow's Gloves should remain the best thing in the game for a very long time for both melee and range. I think that that's perfectly fair. If they wanted to put something like this in the game, I would be much more apt to vote yes if it was an attachment to Barrow's Gloves. I don't like removing the entire idea of Barrow's Gloves, which has slowly been being pushed with the release of things like Granite Gloves. Sure, Granite Gloves are nowhere near the same stats, but it's buyable, it's cheap, and it's close-ish to comparable. Like, it's a, all in all, a fairly minor difference. It's, I think, the equivalent of Addy Gloves, which, yes, is a big difference, but it's buyable, and it saves you tons of time questing. Barrow's Gloves aren't that crazy of an achievement anymore, but they are still something that I think most players should seek to get, and I would like them to remain the best in slot, or if they are not remaining the best in slot, at least be something that are still required to upgrade best in slot stuff. So either way, you would still have to get Barrow's Gloves. That's kind of the reason I'm against this one so much. Same reason as before when they proposed it with Rev Caves. Here's a unique one, though. The Scythe of Viter. I'm assuming it's Viter. That's what I'm going to go with for future pronunciation reasons. This one is very strange. I think that the most comparable thing to it is going to be a God Sword. So I'm going to put a God Sword stats on the screen and then use that for a comparison. However, this is very different in its functionality. Alright, so first of all, this has an attack rate of 7. 7 game ticks per attack means it's 4.2 seconds per attack between this weapon, which is pretty nuts. That's actually slower than a God Sword, which is, to me, very strange. I've always thought of God Swords as very slow hitting weapons, and this being slower than that, how is it going to compete? Well, The reason for that is this can actually hit 3 enemies at once. Now, it can only hit 3 enemies at once if they're in front of you, similar to when you spec with a halberd. However, it is not, and this is very, very important, I think, it is not going to be 3 hits of the same caliber. It is going to be the first hit can deal max damage, the second hit will deal half damage, and the third hit will deal half damage of that. So 100% on the first hit, 50% on the second hit, and then 25% on the last one, which is extremely relevant to note. Now, I don't know if this will ever be changed, but as of right now, this doesn't have any healing capabilities like the staff did earlier. I think that without that, I don't see this being used very much. I can't really see it being that crazy, even though it can actually hit one enemy several times. You can see on the right side of the screenshot that I'm probably showing you, the scythe can also hit larger enemies 3 times with each single attack. Meaning, if you have a 3x3 enemy, they will obviously be taking up 3 tiles in front of you. You can swing and it will hit them 3 times. However, I still don't think this will come anywhere near the DPS of the existing weapons. Correct me if I'm wrong, but even if it maxes every time, it's such a slow-hitting weapon, especially with the addition of the Infernal Defender that was mentioned earlier, which could potentially lead to max hit increase on other weapons. I just don't see this really being used. It's really inaccurate for how slow it is, so I just don't really see this weapon seeing too much utility, unless it somehow gets like a passive healing effect added to it. Then I could maybe see it replacing Guthans, potentially, at God Wars. Even then, it would probably have less healing capabilities than Guthans would, so until then, I just don't see it really having too much use. I'm going to vote yes just on the premise of it's a cool concept. I would like to see it in the game, and I would like to see it improved and actually have some kind of niche uses somewhere in the game. It's also worth mentioning it doesn't have a special attack, so throwing that out there. But yeah, probably going to vote yes on this just because it's unique as a concept. I like it. It would be cool to see it improved in a way that actually makes it useful. Alright, so the last thing on this poll is actually the Sinaza Shroud. So this one is basically just a cosmetic that changes after you've completed X amount of raids, 100, 500, 1000, 2500, and 5000. So I think that that's kind of cool. It's just a completionist thing. So I'm going to vote yes for it because, as you guys know, or maybe you don't know, I'm running a series on my Iron Man that's related to completionist stuff. So I think that'd be a pretty cool thing to obtain. It doesn't hurt anyone to have it in the game, especially because it's just cosmetic as far as I'm aware. Yes, it's entirely cosmetic. So if it's entirely cosmetic, it can't hurt the game at all. It's just an item that's there to look pretty. Alright, so that was a lot of talking. Sorry for the, long-winded things and some of them, but obviously I'm fairly passionate about this game, and I like having discussions about stuff like this. This is something I do in my stream all the time, so if you guys enjoyed this video and you aren't already following me on Twitch, feel free to do so. I actually cut off my stream to go ahead and make this video because I was so passionate about a lot of these topics. So if you guys enjoyed it, make sure you like, comment, subscribe. Feel free to head over to my Twitch. I might be doing another stream today because, like I said, cut off my last one to actually make this video. Depends on how long it takes to render and upload this. So I will see you guys all tomorrow with another Rags to Raids video. I hope you guys did enjoy this video. Please leave comments below with discussions and whatnot. I want to hear what you guys think. I want to know if you guys are thinking the same things that I'm thinking, if you disagree, if you have other ideas of where these things could potentially end up being used. I would love to see it. So, peace out, guys. Catch you tomorrow. Have a fantastic day.